Okay, so we're turning our attention back to the George Gibney story. George Gibney, of course, is the former Irish swimming coach who was accused of 27 counts of indecent assault and unlawful carnal knowledge. He did, though, escape conviction following a Supreme Court ruling in 1993. Shortly after that, George Gibney went to Scotland and then ultimately resided in the United States, where he still lives to this day. Adrian Barry is with us in studio, and this is something that journalists and politicians, indeed, over the last 20 plus years have been covering.
Yeah, and it's beginning to bubble up again, which is a very positive development for those who are looking to seek justice, obviously, around this. And it's been surprising maybe in some ways that it hasn't had more coverage over the years. It seems to have maybe slipped off the radar slightly, but Irvin Muchnick's been doing a lot of work on it to try and raise the profile of the case again, to try and raise it politically, obviously in the US. Clearly this meeting with Maureen O'Sullivan to try and raise it politically here as well. So I think for all of those involved in the case, we may be getting closer to some sort of justification in it.
Yeah, you mentioned Irvin Muchnick there. He, for anybody who doesn't know, is an investigative journalist based in the United States. He's written books on this. He's written 2 editions of his new book, The George Gibney Chronicles. We did have him on the show after he released the first edition of that book. You can catch that interview back in full if you want a bit more of the context around the United States on youtube.com/off the ball. But his new edition contains information about George Gibney, particularly details of the time spent by Gibney in Peru, which could have implications for his status in the United States. Now, Irvin Muchnick was in Dublin a couple of weeks ago. He met with TD Maureen O'Sullivan, as Adrian just mentioned there, and O'Sullivan obviously has raised previous concerns about Gibney in a series of Dáil questions. We spoke to the both of them after their meeting. You're very welcome, folks. Thank you very much for your time. The first time the two of you have met, and I guess when you think about the relationship that the two of you have, it's all to do, unfortunately, with the story of George Gibney and what's happened over the last couple of years and the efforts to extradite. So you met today in government buildings. What was the nature of your meeting?
Well, I suppose really the fact that Irvin was coming to Ireland, it was an opportunity to meet face to face, because we've been emailing and in touch by email quite constantly over the past few years on the George Gibney case. So it's always very good to meet the person in face to face.
Is there anything in particular that you wanted to get off your chest, or any points that you wanted to stress today, Irvin?
Yes, Owen. It's first of all, it is just exciting to be in Ireland and to meet Maureen. But there's always old Gibney business and new Gibney business, and as we press, on this decades-long fight to get justice for his victims and accountability, I've always been focused on what new things we can find that are going to motivate the American government to do its part and help coordinate information with the Irish government and get Gibney extradited back for trial. And the new information that we have isn't just the kind of paperwork questions that Judge Breyer raised in my Freedom of Information Act case a couple of years ago, but new information about actual potentially nefarious activities that Gibney was involved in the United States in the late 1990s when he was the head of a church group medical mission to Peru. And so I have new reporting that I believe, according to my government sources, federal agents are interested in about what happened in Peru with George Gibney, how he got there, what he did, whether it was with an Irish passport, and this raises new substantive issues that could assist this two-continent campaign to bring a good resolution to the Gibney matter.
Right, so here is Irvin Muchnick's outline of the information that he's uncovered about George Gibney's trip to Peru. For legal reasons, we have removed the names of 2 specific groups mentioned in this segment. Let's talk about this new information then that's contained in the second edition of your book, which is available on Amazon, or at least will be available on Amazon soon. Irvin, what exactly have you discovered and how can this contribute?
Well, George Gibney had a resume when he was seeking jobs in Colorado after his swimming career ended in scandal after a very brief period of time of coaching in the Denver, Colorado area. He worked in human resources, and he, in his resume, other parts of which have completely checked out, so I'm confident that this part of his resume is also accurate. He called himself the chairman of the, and he talked about the fact that he had gone with a church group from the Denver area down to Peru to work in a medical mission, which is problematic from both ends. It's problematic because he may have brought kids from his church in the Denver area with him on foreign travels. As we know from the Murphy report, he had a very authoritarian and a very abusive system with the swimming groups that he took abroad. So that's problematic on that, and it's also problematic because he was serving a vulnerable population of children in Peru. And we see also that he did other things. He volunteered for a children's mental health program in Denver. He worked on the board of a state college program for at-risk youth. So we see this pattern of Gibney compulsively and opportunistically getting into positions of authority where he could get close to young people who were ill-equipped to defend against his sexual predation. So knowing that it is almost certainly accurate that he did have this involvement in the Peru church mission, I looked into it a little more, canvassed all of the parishes in the Archdiocese of Denver, and learned a really amazing story about how Gibney's trip to Peru coincided with the time when a sect called, which was in Peru, was trying to make inroads in the United States. So there's a whole host of questions. I have never been big on emphasizing the Catholic Church aspect of the Gibney story, because I think it's more of a metaphor for the kind of institutional abuse that takes place across a lot of different platforms, religion, sports, and other areas. But it does seem that there is like real connections here that need to be pursued, and will bring out real new facts that can motivate the American government in a way that they haven't previously been motivated.
So Irvin there believes that this fresh information about Gibney travelling to Peru could have implications and open a possible door to extradition. Now, the other way that he may be extradited is through the uncovering of fresh information from individuals who have previously not come forward with allegations against a former swimming coach. And this is something that TD Maureen O'Sullivan spoke about. Are we in a situation now where, without that new information, the possible extradition of George Gibney is nigh on impossible?
Yeah, that's what I had been pursuing, and the various times that I have been on the media, I've been appealing to people who hadn't come forward in the past, that it's a different atmosphere today, there's more support today, victims who come forward are believed, in the hope that somebody would come forward who was abused by Gibney but who hadn't presented themselves before now. And and very sadly that hasn't happened, and we can understand maybe people are trying to draw a line under it, or they don't want to go back into that horrible space, but that's the one chance that we would have. But the other really frustrating thing is that the reasons his case wasn't pursued back in the day would not stand up today. And I was just saying to Irvin that we're in a difficult time here. We have the information coming out about mother and baby homes, about Magdalen laundries, about industrial schools, and people in their 70s and 80s today are talking about things that happened them 40, 50, longer ago, and they're gradually getting justice. But those people who are abused by Gibney, they haven't had that justice, and some of them, I know, are suffering so badly today, and they suffer in various ways. But one of the most poignant ones I heard about was people who were fantastic swimmers, great potential, probably achieved a certain amount, had potential to do more, and now they can't get in the water.
So Maureen's message there, Adrian, is that, while this is obviously a complicated process and there is no guarantee whatsoever that Gibney ever be extradited on this, one of the ways that could happen is through people coming forward with new information to the Gardaí.
Yeah, it's such an incredibly difficult ask, obviously, of people that, you can absolutely assume that people have dealt with this in the way that people deal with horror in their lives, that, for some people they will have dealt with it, you assume, and try to put together some semblance of a life, I guess, post that. And you can absolutely assume as well that on the flip side of that, there's a whole range of people who have been affected by this and have not dealt with it at all. But certainly in terms of trying to advance the case from a legal perspective, that would be one of the most obvious ways that if somebody was to come forward with new allegations. But yeah, I mean, what an incredibly difficult thing that must be to do.
We are going to leave you with this. It's the final word from Irvin Muchnick. Here he is discussing the implications that the Gibney case can have regardless of the ultimate outcome. Irvin, just last word to you then. We spoke to you back in May and you said 2019 is going to be a big year for the case. Obviously the new information you've uncovered about Peru is what you've been talking about, I assume. What are you expecting next, or without obviously revealing too much, what are your plans next in terms of covering the story?
Well, I feel that that we have a roadmap now for everything. Everything in the toolbox is out there. U.S. federal government agents have more resources than I do to interview witnesses, to subpoena domestic sources, to reach out to foreign governments, and to coordinate and pull together the information. And the last thing I want to say, Owen, is this. This exercise is valuable beyond the justice that we can get for Gibney's victims. And we do want to get justice for Gibney's victims, although some of them actually are tired of the story and aren't sure that bringing him to the dock in Ireland is even going to make their lives better. So that part of it is complicated. But the part that we always have to remember is that this is about George Gibney world, is Irish swim world, it's American swim world, it's sports world, and it's calling to account the groups with government funding and with media backing and with popular culture enthusiasm draw young people into these programs when they're not protected. And we have to hold to account the institutions and the organizations that have enabled this type of behavior and make sure that it never happens again. And that is something that can happen regardless of what the outcome is for the crimes of George Gibney.